Hansu.
What's up, YouTube? Hot Soup here. I wish I could say this was going to be a positive video about New World, but it's about Tuning Orbs, so of course I'm going to be super aggravated talking about it. Sorry ahead of time. The devs posted a new dev blog titled Removing Tuning Orbs yesterday, and it's a weird one. It really comes off defensive and quite frankly feels like a whole lot of smoke being blown up our butt. I think it's well documented on this channel that I despise the Tuning Orbs mechanic in the game. There's really no upside to them, despite this dev blog trying to convince you otherwise. If you don't want to hear me rant about it in the next few minutes, just know the TLDR is they are making a change to the upcoming limit on mutated runs. They're going to raise it from 20 to 25 once the orbs are removed in the July patch. I think that's definitely better. I wish it was higher or unlimited, but I think 25 is a fair compromise if there has to be a limit at all. There's no clarification from them if this is just on opening the dungeon or actually clearing it or just running it. I don't know how they're going to measure it. The fact they didn't clarify that in this blog has me very worried that it's not on opening. They just don't want us to hear the bad news yet. Okay, strap in. Let's read through this together. The limitation of an entry mechanic for expeditions allows us to provide great loot and progress on the expertise system. Objection? Hold on. It's the first line. I already have a problem with it. This is going to be a long one, guys. I'm sorry. The expertise system was created by them, and it's just an obvious way to slow player progression. Adding tuning orbs, which in their own words is a limiting mechanic, on top of another limiting mechanic with the expertise system is really just bad design. There are many other ways to gate progression which doesn't limit the content the player can experience. They could have said your first 3 runs of the day will get you expertise bumps, or you can run the dungeon as much as you want, but you have a higher chance at legendaries if you use an orb or something. It's frustrating that they either didn't realize this themselves, or more likely, they just didn't have the time before release to address it. But quite frankly, it doesn't excuse it. For example, acquiring tuning orbs required players to utilize the game's other activities, such as crafting, faction missions, and closing corruption breaches. None of those things are an example of the previous sentence regarding loot and expertise, so it makes me think a sentence or a paragraph got chopped out of this. I guess in essence, they are acknowledging something I've long suspected, though, and mentioned in my Tuning Orbs video, if you're going to go watch that. They really wanted people hanging out in the open world and doing other stuff and thought the dungeons would be a good incentive. However, clearing corruption portals or running faction missions just isn't fun, so forcing people to do unfun things is a bad design philosophy, and I truly, really hope they are over it. Those activities make instance farming inefficient for bots. Here we go. I always thought the orbs are partly to combat bots. This proves it. But there's so many better and efficient ways to do that. And it didn't make an impact on the bot problem at all. They just hung out in the open world running orichalcum farming paths 24/7. So I don't even know why you mentioned this. It was obviously a failed attempt at stopping them. It also makes economic and power progression less severe between players who have time to play dozens of expeditions a day from those players who don't have as much time. I get the sentiment here. It's an MMO thing. You know, power disparity is always the big boogeyman justifying time gates. I get it, even if I feel it's very misguided. Honestly, the no-lifers will always find a way to no-life the game. I've seen it time and time again. Also, people find workarounds to the limit. In this game, very early on after launch, they just sold orb spots, right? Aegis didn't crack down on that, so people did run the dungeons dozens of times a day. So I don't know how not to take this as pure lip service. All orbs did was punish casual players. A guy who logs in for 2 hours a night doesn't want to go out and farm corruption portals for hours or grind to make gold to pay for a spot in the dungeon. The design is awful and short-sighted, honestly. The power disparity is huge in the game as it is. Large companies that own Everfall and Windsward are in a league of their own. That, more than anything, needed dev attention instead of this time gate. Oh my god, that was a real rant. Sorry. All right, let's keep going here. Looking back, we missed the mark with the initial implementation, which had much more friction to daily play than intended. After hearing your initial feedback on Tuning Orbs, we added them to the faction shop as an interim step while we worked toward the goal of removing the orb requirement altogether. This paragraph, more than anything else on this blog, made me really upset. I hate to be so critical of these devs, but this paragraph is straight up gaslighting. The orbs were initially implemented in the final alpha test patch in May 2021. The feedback from testers at the time was hugely negative. People suggested to them that the orbs be tradable on the market, or at the very least, have the mats be tradable. They also suggested making it purchasable in the faction vendor. All of this feedback came from the testers months before launch. So when did they address it? February 2022. That's 8 months after that alpha test patch and 5 months after launch. They don't mention that in that paragraph. They do not deserve praise for this. They took way too long to address the problem. Orbs was a huge factor in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of players leaving the game. And to say they were listening by addressing it 4 to 5 months after a massive exodus is quite frankly deceiving. It's dishonest. They are not copying to making a bad design decision here. They are essentially sweeping it under the rug. The intention behind daily and or weekly limitations was to remove all the friction from entering the expeditions and give players an ample opportunity to optimize their reward gain while leveling the playing field with players. That's fine, I guess. I wish they had done it at launch. On average, our data shows that less than 5% of players who run mutated expeditions run more than 25 mutated expeditions in a given week. I don't trust this stat at all, especially as justification for this limit. I'm always starved for mutation orbs each week. I don't want to sit in global and look for groups all day. I have to imagine a lot of people are in the same boat. So even though I want to run more, I'm not included in that 5%. In short, if they didn't have such a terrible cooldown on the orb purchases or crafting it, people would run them more. It seems obvious to me. The majority of our players that do run mutated expeditions complete 5 to 20 each week. We initially chose 20 per week as that accounts for 85% of the mutated expedition runs per week. We've heard your feedback and are raising the limit on mutator runs from 20 to 25 per week to better accommodate the 95% of players running mutated expeditions each week. This limit ensures a more equitable progression for players who do not have time to run more than 25 per week versus those that do. Oh boy, I need a second to parse that. I don't think they understand why people hate their tuning orbs. People don't want to be limited in experiencing the content. They are missing the point. They are removing part of the fiction, probably the greater one, I totally admit, which is forcing people to do faction missions and corruption portals. I mean, getting rid of that, that's great. But they seem to not get that people want to run the content even if the rewards are limited. They aren't getting it. People want to log on and play the content in the game. They don't want to have to jump through any hoops to do that or be limited in doing that. It's just short-sighted. But, we'll see if the limit affects things. I don't think the limit of 25 is that bad. It's definitely better than 20. It's a good compromise. And, I do believe 95% of the player base won't really worry about more than 25. We hope that this increase will give more players easier access to expeditions and their loot, along with keeping the progression disparity acceptable between players who can play dozens of hours per week and those who cannot. Our PTR with these changes opens soon, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on the new changes. So they are back to the power disparity thing, even though the real disparity is in the faction warfare and owning towns. I don't think they quite get it. I'm very worried about the leadership there at AGS. They're really missing the point of the power disparity, or the cause of the power disparity, I should say. I think we just need to keep providing them feedback, and hopefully they do address it. Well, that's it. Not the most compelling content. I apologize. I know just reading words off of a screen The first time I read through this, I was sincerely upset. I really had to calm down. I really feel like the devs don't quite get why the orbs are terrible in this game. They seem to be very stubbornly holding on to this thought that they need to guide players to the content. It really shouldn't be that way. Not at endgame, at least, and not if they're trying to be a sandbox or partly a sandbox. This isn't the way to do it. But what do you think? I've ranted so much about tuning orbs on this channel. I haven't heard many comments from you guys. I'd love to know if people watching these videos have an opinion on it. Please post in the comments. I like to have that discussion, that back and forth. I haven't heard from anyone who's actually pro tuning orbs other than the people who sell it and make tons of gold. Besides them, I can't think of, especially a casual player, liking the tuning orb system or wanting to see it stay. But if you do, I'd really love to hear from you. That said, if you do like this content, please hit that like button. It really goes a long way on my channel. And if you want to hear more from me about New World, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in Eternum.